Now, some of you may have been familiar with that, may have heard that before. That is S.M. Lockridge's video. That's a 3-minute version. It goes on much longer, as you can tell. I wanted to play his video rather than me trying to do that because obvious reasons. I would just give obvious reasons. S.M. Lockhart, actually, literally, his name is Shadrach Meshach Lockhart. I think that's fantastic. This guy was destined to be a preacher of some form. He was a longtime minister, 40 years minister at a prominent African-American church in San Diego, California, called Calvary Baptist Church. You may have heard of him through some different things. This is his best known, most well-known snippet. It goes on for 6.5 minutes of him doing this. That was just a 3.5-minute version. But here's the kicker. It is at the end of an 1.5-hour long sermon that he does that. And the crowd was still there. It was crazy. But if he was preaching like that, no one would have been asleep for sure. That is some impressive stuff. Billy Sunday, another evangelist, once said that there are 256 names for Jesus in the Bible. You just heard a few of them. That's just a few that S.M. Lockridge was giving us. But there are a lot of names of Jesus in the Bible. But there's one name that got him in the most trouble. And it's the name that has served this as our title for this whole sermon series. It's the name I Am. And most of the time in this series, what we've been doing is we would actually talk about what Jesus says after he says, I am. He says, I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, the life. I am, and then we'd focus on the second part. Well, today, we're going to focus on that first part, those first 2 words. And we have hinted at this all throughout the series, but there's a time that Jesus just said, I am, and this got him in trouble. In John 8, everyone is asking a question, who is this Jesus? Who is this guy? He's been healing people. He's been forgiving people. He's been pushing back. He's actually been rebuking the religious leaders of the time. And they're asking, who is this Jesus? And at the end of John 8, nearing the end of the chapter, he's in a discussion about Abraham and being a child of Abraham and what it means. And this is what he says. Jesus answered, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was even born, I am. At that point, they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus was hidden from them, and he left the temple. Now, obviously, Jesus said something to tick them off. I mean, they were pretty upset, enough to pick stones up to throw at him. I've said some things that upset people before, but I have yet to say something where people reach for stones to throw at me. I'm still young. This could happen. But this is what happened to Jesus, is when he said this, people literally were going to the ground, picking up stones, saying, where is he? Let me at him. And it's amazing how quickly that can happen. As soon as he says it and they are ticked off, they are reaching for stones, and then all of a sudden, he's hidden from them. We don't know exactly how. We don't know what happens here. Maybe a miracle, maybe the disciples stepping in, whatever happens. We just know that they can't do what they wanted to do. The issue, though, is really important for us to understand. See, the Jews understood it immediately. When Jesus said, I am, they understood immediately what was going on. Because centuries before Jesus, there was a man named Moses. And this man named Moses met God at a place that we know as the burning bush. He met God at the burning bush, and while there, if you remember the story of Moses, first 40 years of his life, he was there in Egypt, being raised in Pharaoh's household, knowing who he was, knowing that he was a Jew in Pharaoh's household. The next 40 years, he's on the run because he kills an Egyptian, and he's afraid that what that means, what that's going to look like for him, and so he's on the run for the next 40 years. It is at that time that God calls him from a burning bush to go back to Pharaoh and basically say, let my people go. Well, Moses has a question. Moses protested, Exodus 3 says, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? I got to admit, like, whenever I first read this, for a long time reading it, I'm like, well, the God of your ancestors. But think about this. This is actually a really legit question. Because anyone that's going to come in and say what Moses is about to say to Pharaoh and to the people of Israel, saying, hey, we need to hightail it out of here. God says so. Hey, what's the name of this God? We would still do the same. What God are you talking about? What God is it that's calling you? Because we recognize that although they may not have the power of God Almighty, we recognize that there's a lot of other small g gods that people follow. So which God are you talking about? So Moses is being very practical here. What's his name? What's your name? They're going to ask that. I know it. They're going to ask me. What should I tell them? So God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Now, I've heard some weird names, but I have to admit, that is a strange name. That is not an easy name. I'm sure there's a lot of teachers now that would be looking at, how do I pronounce that? I-A-M? Is that Eam? It's got to be more, it's not I am. It's got to be Eam, because I am that's a weird name. It's a different kind of name. What's your heritage? What's your ancestry? Who is this that named you this? Well, God chose this name. This is his name. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to be remembered for all generations. In other words, this is a pretty epic moment in Jewish history. Because when they're looking back upon the story of the Exodus coming out of Egypt, for 400 years, they've been in slavery. And they have, in that time, kind of forgotten about God. And then Moses says, but I haven't forgotten about you. So he sends Moses to go reintroduce the Israelites to God and say, I am the God of your ancestors, God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, that same God. I am Yahweh, your God. And I want you to come with me. And every Jew after this moment, every year at minimum, would tell this story about how the I am, the present God, was present for Moses and the Israelites in that time, and he is present for us in whatever we're going through in this time. And so every Jew knew this story. So when Jesus says, I am, they recognize immediately what he is saying. There's no doubt what is going on. There's no question involved. When he said, I am, he was equating himself to God. He was calling himself God. And if Jesus wasn't God, this would have been considered blasphemy, and by the law would have been punishable by death. Stoning, in fact. So in other words, the Jewish people that were there hearing Jesus say this, and they were ticked off because he blasphemed God's name, the appropriate response for them was to pick up the stones to stone him. Because no one does that to God's name unless it's true. Unless it's true. And part of the reason I believe it's true is because Jesus did not get stoned that day. We don't know exactly what happened, but he was literally hidden from those who wanted to kill him. Maybe that was God's approval, saying, yeah, I'm going to let that one sit because he's right. This is the I am. Jesus is the great I am. But besides just the connection to God, what does that really mean? What does it mean for Jesus to be the I am? I want to look a little bit at the Greek here as John records it. He records Jesus saying in Greek, ego eimi. Okay, it's all Greek to you, I get that. But what that means, ego is I, it's the word for I, and emi is the word for I am. Literally translating, this is a redundant phrase. I am. And so just that in and of itself, I am, doesn't compute in our English mind, but if we understand that this is a statement of presence and of power, what he is saying is there is no other. I am the I am. I am who I am, as God would say in Exodus. John would record, I am. I am God. That's what Jesus was saying. Very clearly, not beating around the bush one bit. He claimed to be God. And so then every time that John records, especially Jesus saying, I am, and then the resurrection, I am the good shepherd, I am the way, the truth, the life, what he is actually saying is, I, the I am the resurrection. I, the I am the way, the truth, the life. I, the I am the good shepherd. And he's wanting that connection not to simply be what he says after the I am. What he is saying is, Jesus is saying, I am God for you. And in my Godness, I provide shepherding, I provide the way, the truth, the life, I provide the resurrection, I provide the bread, I provide everything that you need. Because the I am sustains life. It is the I am that all life revolves around. So over and over again, Jesus says, I am. There's no one else who can claim that. No one else who can claim that they are the I am. But Jesus does. And I want you to just consider one of the big ideas. Consider it from one direction. Scientists will tell us that we need 4 things to survive. We need water, we need air, we need food, and we need light. Things that we need to survive. Now, to actually thrive, we need a few more things, but just things for life. Water, air, food, and light. Now, did you know that Jesus says, I am, to every one of these? He says, I am the living water. He says, I am the breath of life. I am the bread of life. And I am the light of the world. And he goes on. But what he's saying, in essence, according to science, according to an understanding of just how beings live, he is saying you can't live without the I am. You can't live without Jesus. Without the I am, you can't really survive. That's what he's saying. Now, that all sounds good, but what exactly does that mean? What does it mean to say I can't survive without Jesus? Because, man, I just want to give myself some pushback on that, saying, I know plenty of people who are alive that don't have Jesus, right? I know people that are powerful and influential, and they didn't need Jesus for that. I know people who are rich and have all sorts of wealth, and they have their cars and their houses, and they didn't need Jesus for that. They seem to be living it up, and they don't need Jesus for that. So what does it mean to say I can't survive without Jesus? Well, as Christians, you already know the answer to that. As Christians, you already know what it means that Jesus is your everything, He is your all. But sometimes we need to be reminded so that we can share it with the world. So that we can share with the world why what they think is making them alive is actually killing them. And what they might scorn as being something that only dead people care about is actually things that make you truly alive. Wealth, power, fame, those things can only go so far. They can make life comfortable, but they can't make life survivable. Some of you know this man. Take Howard Hughes, for example. His story fascinates me. I was talking with Chris Walling the other day. He was telling me a story of the airship, the big old plane that he was working on with the military contract during the World War II, and doing all of that. And just stories about him are fascinating. This was, as a young man, He was not just a philanthropist, but he was famous and powerful. He was in the Hollywood scene. He dated several of the most desirable women in Hollywood. He was one of the wealthiest men, not just of his time, but he still ranks as one of the wealthiest men of all time. It's pretty impressive. His money could buy him almost anything, and often it did. Every whim that he might have, he could satisfy. What's interesting about him, though, is the last 20 years of his life. Last 20 years of his life, he was in the spotlight for so many things. In the last 20 of his years of his life, he became a recluse. He was isolated from society. In fact, only his doctors and his personal attendants were the ones that saw him for about 20 years. He was germaphobe during that time for sure, so much so that he didn't want his hair cut, his beard cut, or his nails cut for 20 years. This guy was a sight to behold, but only a few people saw him. And you know what happened whenever he died? After 20 years of most of the world not really hearing from him or hearing about him, not many people noticed. He had all the money in the world, but he didn't really live because he was lacking what made true living possible. People who depend upon money or fame or power for their survival are going to end up with disappointment. This is why Jesus says in Matthew 6 here in 19, he says, "Don't store up treasures here on this earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be." He will go on to say another time, you can't serve two masters. You can't serve both God and mammon, an idea that we say about money. Whenever you make money your God, there's no room for the I am. I am putting all my trust in something that will fade away. But the I am never fades. The I am is always. So let's head back to the statement that Jesus says in John 8. Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth, before Abraham was even born, I am." Some translations just simply say, "Before Abraham was, I am." And that's also interesting language, isn't it? Normally how we would say this is, "Before Abraham was, I was." Right? That would be more grammatically correct because it's a past tense thing, and so you would use the past tense understanding. But Jesus knows that and doesn't. He uses the present tense. And that's important for us to wrap our minds around. A lady, Helen Malcote, once wrote a poem about this idea. I want to share this poem with you. She said this. By the way, this is not a poem that it doesn't rhyme, so if you're looking for Dr. Seuss, that's not quite the same. But she says this, "I was regretting the past and fearing the future. And suddenly my Lord was speaking. My name is I am." He paused. I waited. He continued. "When you live in the past with its mistakes and its regrets, it's hard because I am not there. My name is not I was. When you live in the future with its problems and its fears, it's hard because I am not there. My name is not I will be. But when you live in the moment, it's not hard because I am here. My name is I am." I think she nailed it. Now, she's not making a statement about the eternalness of God. She's not saying that God wasn't there and will be. That's not what she's saying. She's saying God is present. When God introduced himself, he did not say, "I was and am and will be." Now, Revelation gives us a clue on that, gives us some understanding. So that's not necessarily wrong, but his name is I am. And we need to just sit in that for a moment and be present with that. Because whenever all we do is focus on the past, we lean upon the God of the past. We ask for the I was, and that doesn't seem a way to live. Or whenever all we're doing is focusing on the future and the worries and all the problems that are there, even Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. It has enough worries of its own. But when all we do is focus there, we are wanting the God of the I will be. Neither of those are sufficient to living, because we don't live in the past and we don't live in the future. You live right now in the present. And God is the I am. Reminds me of a promise that was made in Joshua 1 verse 9. It says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. This wasn't too long after Moses had been told the name of God as I am. And I can't help but think that whenever this was being said to Joshua, it was ringing in his ears the same kind of idea, that I am wherever you go. I am present. I am with you. There is no place that you can go presently that God is not with you permanently. And that right there is the only way to live. Because when you understand that God is present with you always, and that there is no place where God is not, then you can walk through some very difficult times in this life and have full confidence that you are never alone. Because God's name is I am. Because Jesus said, I am. He is present with you always. No matter where you go, no matter what happens to you. Heard of a story. A woman was praying one day. The woman asked God, who are you, God? And he answered, I am. But who is I am, she asked. And God replied, I am love, I am peace, I am grace, I am joy, I am strength, I am safety, I am shelter, I am power, I am creator, I am comforter, I am the beginning and the end, I am the way, the truth, the life. And he goes on, and the woman begins to tear up with the realization of who God is. But then she asked God, well, if that's who you are, who am I? God looked at her and said, you? You are mine. That's the beautiful thing about the all-present God, is that He is all present in all of your life. And you are His. Fearfully and wonderfully made. You are His prize of creation. And not just you individually, but us collectively. We are so much His that He was willing to send His own Son, the I Am, the great I Am, to die on a cross so that we will be and are with Him as He is with us. And see, this is the story that has been told ever since the beginning. That whenever everything was created, God walked with Adam and Eve. He was present with them. He was with Abraham. He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is with them in every generation. I am the I am. He is the I am. And what that means is that right now, God is here. And then wherever you go, whenever it is right now, God is here, because God is I am. There's nowhere that you can go that God can't be present with you, because He is the great I am. So this morning, if you want a presence of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, if you want the presence of the one who, how did Lockhart say, can't be impeached, He's never going away. If you want the presence of the Almighty in your life, then you need to respond to His invitation. You need to come and do what He says so that you can walk with Him wherever He goes. Because it's less about God is with me wherever I go. It's more about I'm with God wherever He goes. And whenever we get that understanding right, we will change this world. Because God wants the whole world to be saved. And He's going to go find them. So are you willing to join Him? Are you willing to join the I Am wherever He goes and be present with Him? If you need prayers, if you need to walk through the waters of baptism, or if you just need better understanding of what this means for your life, the elders and ministers will surround this auditorium. We would love to pray over you and talk with you more about this. If you have any need, let it be known as we stand and sing together.